Your teenage daughter excited to deposit her first big summer paycheck, $800 cash. But the teller eyes her braids, her hoodie, and slides the money back. Verification needed, he smirks, dripping suspicion. Humiliation stings. She calls you, just as you, Dr. Michelle Adebayo, CEO of the bank's parent company, walk in. Witness the shock on his face as prejudice collides head-on with power he never expected. Feel the tension? What happens next changes everything. The air conditioning in the First National Trust branch hummed a low, indifferent note, a stark contrast to the simmering July heat clinging to the Atlanta pavement outside. Zara Adebayo pushed through the heavy glass door, the cool air a brief respite. She clutched a standard white envelope, thick with the tangible results of 6 weeks of hard work, $800 in cash, earned filing, organizing, and occasionally fetching lukewarm coffee at a local nonprofit dedicated to housing justice. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. Earned. At 17, Zara moved with a confidence that sometimes belied her years. Her cropped braids framed a face alive with intelligence, her usual bright eyes slightly narrowed in concentration as she scanned the teller line. She wore a simple gray hoodie, a comfortable shield against the aggressive chill of most buildings, and jeans. Nothing extraordinary, just a teenager on an errand. Yet, as she approached the counter, she felt the familiar prickle, the subtle shift in atmosphere that often accompanied her presence in spaces like these. The teller, a man whose nameplate read Greg Dawson, looked to be in his mid-50s. His thinning hair was meticulously combed, his tie knotted with precision, but his brow seemed permanently etched with lines of suspicion like grooves worn deep by years of distrust. He finished with the customer ahead of her, a crisp, dismissive nod accompanying the transaction's end. Then his eyes landed on Zara. They lingered for a moment on her braids, slid down to her hoodie, and finally settled on the envelope in her hand. A flicker, almost imperceptible, crossed his face. Appraisal, judgment, conclusion. Help you? He asked, his tone flat, devoid of the practiced warmth he'd offered the previous customer. Yes, I'd like to deposit this into my savings account, Zara said, sliding the envelope and her debit card across the cool marble counter. She spoke clearly, projecting the polite assurance her mother had always insisted upon. Never let them think you don't belong. Dawson picked up the envelope, his thumb and forefinger testing its thickness. He pulled out the stack of bills, mostly 20s, a few 10s and 5s. He counted them slowly, deliberately, twice. Then he looked back at Zara, his gaze hardening. $800, he stated, less a question than an accusation. Yes, Zara confirmed, keeping her voice steady. From my summer internship. He tapped the stack of bills on the counter. This is a significant amount of cash for someone like you to be depositing. The pause was infinitesimal, but it hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Someone like you. The words, unspoken but implied, echoed the weariness Zara often felt but refused to show. It's my earnings, she repeated, a thread of impatience weaving into her calm. I have an account here. Have had one since I was 13. Dawson didn't look at her account information on his screen. Instead, he pushed the envelope and her card back towards her. We need to verify the source of funds for cash deposits of this nature. Zara frowned. I've deposited checks from the nonprofit before. And cash from birthday gifts. Never had an issue. A smirk touched Dawson's lips, thin and unpleasant. Policy changes, especially with large cash amounts. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial tone that felt more like a threat. Look, things are tight everywhere. People get desperate. We have to be careful. The implication was clear, ugly. He suspected the money wasn't legitimately hers. Drug money? Stolen? The possibilities, filtered through his biased lens, were insulting. Heat rose in Zara's cheeks, a flush of anger and humiliation. She took a deep breath, anchoring herself. Are you suggesting I came by this money illegally, Mr. Dawson? He recoiled slightly, feigning offense. Just following procedure, miss. Standard practice. But his eyes didn't meet hers. Okay, Zara said, her voice dangerously quiet. Then let's follow procedure. Who do you need to call to verify? Your employer, he said, the smirk returning, confident he had cornered her. Let's get them on the line. Zara didn't hesitate. She pulled out her phone, her fingers tapping the screen with deliberate precision. She knew this dance, the exhausting choreography of proving her legitimacy in a world that often questioned it by default. As she scrolled through her contacts, the main doors of the bank swung open again. A presence entered the room, shifting the energy instantly. Heads turned. The low hum of conversation dipped. Dr. Michelle Adebayo, Zara's mother, stood framed in the entrance, sunlight glinting off the sharp cut of her sapphire blue pantsuit. She carried an aura of command as naturally as she carried her leather portfolio, not aggressive but absolute. Her gaze swept the room, cool and assessing, before landing on her daughter standing at the teller counter, a stubborn set to her jaw. Then her eyes moved to Greg Dawson, lingered on the cash and cards still sitting on Zara's side of the counter, and narrowed almost imperceptibly. Michelle strode forward, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor, a sound that seemed to punctuate the sudden silence. She stopped beside Zara, placing a perfectly manicured hand gently on her daughter's shoulder. "Is there a problem here, Zara?" she asked, her voice smooth as silk, yet carrying an undeniable undertone of steel. Zara looked up, relief washing over her, quickly followed by a renewed surge of indignation. "Mr. Dawson needs to verify the source of my deposit, Mom. He wants to call my employer." Michelle's gaze shifted fully to Dawson. He seemed frozen, his earlier smirk replaced by a look of dawning confusion, perhaps even fear. He clearly didn't recognize her, but he recognized power when he saw it. "Mr. Dawson," Michelle said, her voice dropping slightly, becoming even quieter, yet somehow more resonant. "My daughter wishes to deposit $800 into her savings account, an account she has maintained with this institution for 4 years. Please process the transaction now." Dawson swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Ma'am, bank policy requires verification for certain cash deposits." He began, his voice faltering. Michelle cut him off, not by raising her voice, but by sharpening her focus. "Mr. Dawson, I am her employer. Or rather, her internship is with a non-profit foundation funded significantly by the corporation I lead." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "My name is Dr. Michelle Adebayo. I am the CEO of Unity Bancorp." The name hit the air like a physical force. Unity Bancorp, the parent company of First National Trust. The name emblazoned on the very letterhead Dawson used daily. His face drained of color, leaving behind a pasty, shocked mask. The furrow in his brow deepened, no longer conveying suspicion but sheer panic. "Process my daughter's deposit," Michelle repeated, her voice still level, dangerously calm. "And then, Mr. Dawson, you and I will have a conversation. Upstairs, in the regional manager's office. I believe I have a standing meeting therein." She glanced at her watch, precisely 10 minutes. Dawson's hands trembled as he reached for Zara's envelope and card. He fumbled with the keys on his terminal, his eyes darting nervously between mother and daughter. The transaction was completed in trembling silence. As the receipt printed, Michelle gave Zara's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Wait for me in the car, baby," she murmured, her voice softening only for her daughter. Zara nodded, grabbing her receipt and card. She cast one last look at Dawson, whose face was now a mixture of terror and disbelief, before walking towards the exit, her head held high. The cool air outside felt less like a respite now, more like the first breath after emerging from polluted waters. Later that evening, the Atlanta skyline glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of Michelle Adebayo's penthouse apartment. The space was minimalist, elegant, filled with African art that spoke of heritage and strength. Yet, Michelle felt the familiar weight of the past settle upon her shoulders, heavier tonight than usual. She stood tracing the faded image in a silver frame, her grandmother, Esther, standing proud but weary in front of a sharecropper's cabin in rural Alabama, her hands calloused, her eyes holding generations of resilience and struggle. Zara was curled up on the plush sofa, scrolling through her phone, the earlier incident simmering beneath her quiet exterior. Michelle walked over, sinking beside her daughter, the faint scent of her expensive perfume mixing with the lingering tension. "He made me feel like a criminal, Mom," Zara said softly, looking up from her phone. "Just for depositing money I worked hard for." Michelle nodded, her gaze distant for a moment. "I know that feeling, baby. I know it all too well." The gleam of the bank lobby dissolved, replaced by the memory of fluorescent lights humming over worn linoleum. Birmingham, Alabama, 1999. Michelle, 19, a scholarship student at UAB, stood shifting her weight in line at a different bank, a local branch with pretensions of grandeur. In her hand, she clutched a crumpled deposit slip and a small wad of bills, tips from her weekend waitressing job at a noisy diner downtown. She also carried a carefully filled-out application for a small personal loan, just enough to cover the exorbitant cost of her organic chemistry textbooks. The loan manager, a man named Henderson with watery eyes and a condescending smile, had barely glanced at her application. He'd looked at her worn jeans, her determined but tired face, her skin. "I'm sorry, Miss Adebayo," he'd said, the name sounding foreign and awkward on his tongue. "We just can't extend credit in this case. The risk is too high." "Risk?" Michelle had countered, her voice trembling slightly with outrage. "My grades are excellent. I have a scholarship. I work 20 hours a week. I just need help with these books." Henderson had leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Let's be frank. Your type, well, there's a history of not repaying debts. It's just statistics. Business." He'd slid the application back, a gesture of finality. "Your type. The same poison, different decade." She'd left the bank that day feeling diminished, angry, but fiercely determined. She found another way to get the books, working extra shifts until exhaustion gnawed at her, fueled by a fire Henderson had unintentionally stoked. Years melted away. The diner uniform gave way to business suits, the cheap apartment to boardrooms. But the landscape, while different, held familiar pitfalls. As a rising star at a major financial firm in New York, before she spearheaded the formation of Unity Bancorp with a vision for something different, she'd endured the endless stream of microaggressions. The surprise when she spoke eloquently. The assumptions that her insights were less valuable. The hushed boardroom comment she overheard. "These diversity hires, admirable, I suppose, but they inevitably dilute the standard of excellence." Each instance was a small cut, a reminder that her presence was conditional, her success perpetually scrutinized. She looked back at her grandmother's photo. Esther, who had saved pennies in a tin can buried under the floorboards because banks wouldn't serve black sharecroppers fairly, who had instilled in Michelle's mother, and then in Michelle, the unwavering belief in education and self-reliance as tools of liberation. "Banks weren't built for us, Zara," Michelle said, her voice low and intense. She picked up the framed photo, holding it gently. "They built empires on the backs of people like Grandma Esther through redlining, discriminatory lending, denying capital to black communities, financing the very systems that kept them down." She met Zara's gaze, seeing her own youthful fire reflected there. What happened today wasn't just about Greg Dawson's prejudice, though that was ugly enough. It's about a system, a history. A ledger filled with entries that have always undervalued black lives, black work, black money. She placed the photo back on the table, a silent testament. "We've fought hard to get inside these institutions, Zara, to gain power. But getting a seat at the table isn't enough if the rules of the game are still rigged." Her hand rested on Zara's knee. "It's time to rewrite the rules. It's time to balance the ledger." Zara nodded slowly, the anger in her eyes shifting towards understanding, then hardening into resolve. The humiliation of the afternoon was morphing into something else, something her mother recognized instantly, the spark of righteous anger, the fuel of change. Zara didn't just stay angry, she channeled it. That evening, sitting not on the penthouse sofa but at her own desk, she distilled the humiliation and frustration of the bank encounter into a 60-second TikTok video. With stark captions overlaying footage of her recounting the incident, her voice clear and unwavering, describing Dawson's smirk, his words, the arrival of her CEO mother, she ended it with a simple, powerful hashtag #BankingWhileBlack. She posted it before going to sleep, expecting maybe a few dozen views from friends. She woke up to a firestorm. The video exploded. Thousands of views became tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, then millions. The comments section flooded with similar stories, a torrent of shared experiences from black men and women across the country detailing dismissive tellers, unexplained account holds, loan denials despite excellent credit, the constant, wearying burden of suspicion. #BankingWhileBlack trended on Twitter. News outlets started picking it up. In Atlanta's historic Sweet Auburn district, a neighborhood pulsating with the legacy of black entrepreneurship and civil rights history, Jamal Wright watched Zara's video on his phone, a grim recognition settling in his gut. Jamal, a charismatic community organizer in his late 20s, ran a nonprofit focused on economic empowerment for Atlanta's underserved communities, the very kind of organization Michelle Adebayo's Unity Bancorp strategically funded. He saw Zara's experience not as an isolated incident, but as a symptom of the deep-seated economic inequality his organization fought daily. He screenshotted the video, shared it with his network, and started making calls. Within days, a protest was organized outside the First National Trust branch downtown, signs reading "Dignity is non-negotiable, stop banking while black, and your bias is showing." Lila Nguyen, a sharp, tenacious investigative reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, saw the trending hashtag and Zara's viral video. Lila, whose own Vietnamese-American family had faced subtle but persistent othering after immigrating, felt an immediate connection to the story's undercurrents of prejudice. She started digging, poring over public records, interviewing former employees, and filing information requests. She began uncovering a disturbing pattern. First National Trust, particularly branches in certain neighborhoods, had a statistically higher rate of denying new account applications from black teenagers compared to their white peers, often citing vague risk factors. Inside the bank branch where it all started, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Greg Dawson had been placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation, but his absence felt like a ghost haunting the teller line. His coworker, Carlos Mendez, felt a knot of guilt tightening in his stomach. Carlos, a meticulous and quiet man whose family had immigrated from Mexico 2 generations ago, had witnessed Dawson's dismissive behavior towards minority customers countless times. He'd seen the eye rolls, heard the muttered comments, observed the extra scrutiny applied to Black and Latino patrons. He had always stayed silent, head down, focused on his own work, worried about losing a job that supported his wife and young son. He told himself it wasn't his business, that Dawson was just a grumpy old man. But seeing Zara's video, hearing the tremor in her voice, knowing he had stood mere feet away and done nothing, it gnawed at him. "I stayed quiet too long," he confessed to his wife that night, the words tasting like ash. It's like letting him steal something from them, their dignity. The ripples reached Zara's high school, a diverse public school known for its academic rigor. Her close friend, Aisha Khan, a bright and outspoken student whose Pakistani-American parents were community activists, was furious. "This isn't just about you, Zara," Aisha declared during lunch, surrounded by supportive friends. "This is about all of us who get judged before we even open our mouths." Inspired by Zara's courage and fueled by her own experiences with Islamophobia, Aisha began organizing a student walkout in solidarity. The plan quickly reached the principal's office. Principal Torres, a proud Puerto Rican man who navigated the complexities of school administration with weary pragmatism, called Zara and Aisha into his office. "Girls, I understand your anger," he said, his tone placating. "But a walkout? It disrupts learning. It politicizes the school environment. We need to handle this through established channels." Zara stood firm, her voice ringing with newfound conviction. "Mr. Torres, with all due respect, being profiled at a bank is political. Being denied opportunities because of how you look is political. For some of us, survival is political. This isn't about disrupting class, it's about demanding the right to exist without suspicion. Education includes learning how to stand up for that right." Aisha nodded fiercely beside her. Principal Torres sighed, rubbing his temples. The neat administrative lines he tried to maintain were blurring against the messy, undeniable reality of his students' lives. The ripple, started by a single transaction, was growing into a wave. The fallout landed squarely on Michelle Adebayo's desk at the gleaming Unity Bancorp headquarters. Zara's video wasn't just a personal affront, it was a public relations crisis and, more importantly to Michelle, a stark indicator that the systemic changes she championed hadn't penetrated deeply enough. While First National Trust was an acquisition, its culture was now Unity Bancorp's responsibility. Michelle moved swiftly. There were no excuses, no attempts to minimize. Her first act was a company-wide mandate. Comprehensive, mandatory anti-bias and cultural competency training for every single employee, from the executive suite to the teller line, starting immediately. She brought in external experts, ensuring the training wasn't just a box-checking exercise but a deep dive into recognizing and dismantling implicit bias. Simultaneously, she reached out to Jamal Wright. Their planned partnership meeting took on a new urgency. Michelle didn't just offer apologies. She offered concrete action. Unity Bancorp announced a multi-million-dollar expansion of its community investment fund, specifically earmarked for grants and low-interest loans to Black-owned startups and small businesses in Atlanta, with Jamal's nonprofit playing a key role in identifying and vetting applicants. "This isn't charity," Michelle stated firmly in the press conference announcing the initiative. "It's an investment in untapped potential that has been historically and systemically undervalued." The internal investigation into Greg Dawson's conduct proceeded. The crucial testimony came from an unexpected source, Carlos Mendez. Encouraged by his wife and wrestling with his conscience, Carlos requested a meeting with the internal affairs team. Risking potential backlash and the discomfort of his colleagues, he detailed Dawson's pattern of behavior, the subtle remarks, the differential treatment, the specific instances he recalled involving other Black and minority customers. He corroborated Zara's account, adding context that painted a picture not of a single mistake, but of ingrained prejudice. His quiet courage sent a ripple of a different kind through the bank, a signal that silence was no longer acceptable. Michelle knew that internal changes and financial commitments weren't enough. The community needed to be heard. She organized a town hall meeting held not in a sterile corporate auditorium but at a community center in the heart of a predominantly Black neighborhood. She invited customers, community leaders, activists, and employees. Jamal Wright spoke passionately about the need for banks to be partners in progress, not gatekeepers of bias. Lila Nguyen, the reporter, attended, taking meticulous notes. The most powerful moment came when an elderly Black woman stood up, her voice frail but steady. It was Ms. Eula Mae Johnson, Michelle's former co-worker from the Birmingham diner decades ago. Michelle recognized her instantly, a wave of affection and respect washing over her. Ms. Eula hadn't come to talk about the diner, she'd come to share her own story. Back in the 80s, Ms. Eula began, her eyes scanning the room. My husband and I, we saved every penny. We wanted to buy a little house over in Collier Heights. Had a good down payment, steady jobs. But the bank? Honey, they took one look at us, saw where we wanted to buy a Black neighborhood, you see. And that map of theirs might as well have had a big red line drawn right around it. Loan denied. No explanation that made sense. Just denied. She looked directly at Michelle. It ain't new what happened to your girl. It's just the same old tune, played on a different instrument. Her testimony hung in the air, a poignant bridge between generations of systemic discrimination. It wasn't just about individual tellers, it was about policies, maps, and deeply embedded biases that shaped destinies. Miles away in his suburban home, Greg Dawson watched the town hall livestream. He was suspended, facing disciplinary action that likely meant termination. The initial shock had given way to a confusing mix of defensiveness, resentment, and a dawning, uncomfortable understanding. His daughter, Emily, a bright 10-year-old, came and sat beside him on the couch, looking at the screen where people were clapping for Ms. Eula. Daddy? Emily asked, her brow furrowed in genuine confusion. Why's everyone so mad at the bank? Why are they mad at you? Dawson looked at his daughter's innocent face, searching for an answer. How could he explain the complex history of prejudice, the subtle ways bias could curdle into discrimination, the weight of history he had never truly considered? He opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. For the first time, the certainty that had always defined his worldview felt fragile, inadequate. He simply shook his head, the lines on his brow deepening not with suspicion, but with a profound, unsettling shame. Autumn painted Atlanta's parks in hues of gold and crimson. At a sprawling community credit fair held in Piedmont Park, the atmosphere buzzed with energy and purpose. Amidst booths offering information on mortgages, small business loans, and credit repair, one table drew a consistent crowd of teenagers. It was manned by Zara Adebayo and Aisha Khan. Instead of just recounting Zara's negative experience, they had turned it into a teachable moment. Their booth, decorated with bright, engaging infographics, focused on financial literacy for young people. They explained compound interest, demystified credit scores, and even ran a simulation showing how small, community-based microloans could empower young entrepreneurs. They weren't just reacting to injustice, they were building tools for empowerment. Zara felt a sense of purpose she hadn't known before the incident. The anger hadn't vanished, but it had been transformed into fuel. Standing beside Aisha, explaining budgeting principles to a group of attentive ninth graders, she felt a different kind of power, the power of knowledge shared. A familiar figure approached the booth, looking slightly hesitant. It was Carlos Mendez. He wasn't wearing his teller uniform. Instead, he wore a Unity Bancorp polo shirt with a new title embroidered beneath the logo, Community Liaison Officer. He smiled warmly at Zara and Aisha. Great setup, ladies, Carlos said, his voice carrying a newfound confidence. Just wanted to let you know officially, Unity Bancorp is launching its first youth advisory board next quarter. We need bright minds like yours to help guide our outreach and ensure our services truly meet the needs of young people in every community. I hope you'll both consider applying. He handed them informational packets. It was a tangible sign of change, a step towards incorporating the voices the system had previously ignored. As Carlos moved on to speak with other community members, another figure approached, moving slowly, almost reluctantly. Greg Dawson. He looked older, his usual stiffness replaced by an air of profound unease. He wasn't wearing a tie, his shirt collar was open. He clutched a simple white envelope in his hand, a stark echo of the envelope Zara had carried that summer day. He stopped in front of Zara, avoiding direct eye contact initially. The bustling energy of the fair seemed to fade for a moment. Aisha instinctively moved closer to Zara. "Miss Adebayo," Dawson began, his voice low and rough. He finally looked up and Zara saw not malice, but a deep, painful regret in his eyes. I wanted to give you this." He held out the envelope. Zara hesitated, then took it. Inside was not money, but a handwritten letter on plain notebook paper. "Dear Miss Adebayo," it read. "There's no excuse for how I treated you. I didn't see a young woman trying to deposit her earnings. I saw stereotypes fueled by my own ignorance and fear. Hearing the stories, seeing the impact, especially hearing Ms. Eula, I realized how blind I've been. My assumptions said more about my own failings than about you. I judged your worth by the limits of my own understanding, and for that I am truly sorry. I know this doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it. I'm trying to learn, trying to understand. Sincerely, Greg Dawson." Zara read the letter slowly. It wasn't absolution, but it felt like a crack in the wall of prejudice he represented. A painful, perhaps necessary, step towards accountability. She looked up at Dawson, who stood waiting, vulnerable. "Thank you for the letter, Mr. Dawson," she said quietly, her voice even. "I hope you do learn." She didn't offer forgiveness. Not yet. But she offered acknowledgement. He nodded mutely, turned, and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. The day culminated with a final announcement from the main stage. Michelle Adebayo stood at the podium, radiant and composed. After highlighting the new initiatives, the expanded investment fund, the youth advisory board, the ongoing anti-bias training, she paused, her gaze sweeping over the diverse crowd. "Progress isn't just about new programs," she declared. "It's about honoring the past and investing in the future. It's about recognizing the resilience of those who endured indignities long before hashtags existed." She gestured towards the side of the stage where Ms. Eula Mae Johnson sat, beaming. "Today," Michelle announced, her voice ringing with emotion, "Unity Bancorp is honored to establish the Eula Mae Johnson Scholarship Fund, providing full college tuition for 4 years to outstanding Atlanta students from underserved communities who demonstrate a commitment to social and economic justice." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Ms. Eula wiped a tear from her eye, accepting a bouquet of flowers as Michelle embraced her. Watching from her booth, Zara felt a swell of pride, for her mother, for Ms. Eula, for the community fighting back. She reached into her bag and pulled out the small, faded photograph of her grandmother, Esther, the sharecropper. With a newfound sense of clarity, she carefully pinned the photo to the corner of their financial literacy display board. It was a quiet gesture, a personal anchor amidst the public celebration. A promise whispered across generations. The ledger was being rewritten, entry by painful, hopeful entry. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Zara looked at the faces around her, teenagers learning about interest rates, small business owners networking, elders sharing stories, her mother leading with strength and purpose. The envelope from Dawson felt heavy in her pocket, not with cash, but with the weight of hard-earned understanding. True wealth isn't counted in dollars, but in the courage to demand they add up fairly. Thank you so much for watching. We hope Zara and Michelle's powerful story of resilience resonated and brought value. If you felt moved or inspired, please like this video, share it to spread awareness, and subscribe for more impactful stories like this.